Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Kufa, for getting us started. And thank you once again to everyone who's joining us here today. Hello, my name is Tonega de Irvin, and my pronouns are they, them. I'm White Mountain Apache and Taino. My reservation is out in Arizona, but I've spent much of my life being in relation to the land here in southern New England. I've been part of the PVD Tree Plan as a community advocate for a couple of years now, and I also have familial ties to the indigenous communities here and to this land. So I will be giving the land acknowledgement this evening, and I'll be speaking first in my own tribal language, in Inde, in the local tribal language, Narragansett, and then in English, and translations will be available upon request privately afterwards. So, Dagote, Shitonegu de Irvin Gunste, Nishle, Inde Hika e Taino Nishle, Adanus e Yusteji dis Chiboko, Hat I Itza I Aye, Shitahe Hika e Shmahe, Erin Goode Hika e Laura Garcia Hika e Tony Whedon. Asqua Wikasin, Natasuis Bapa se Bonesia Gonquinut, Natasuis Tone Indeot, Kataputash Katantuit, Kataputash Auke, Kataputash Mishongtuk, Kataputash Mentonques Ausa Masautuk. I would like to thank all the directions, the sun, the moon, and the stars that blanket us in light. I would like to thank the directions and the winds that come from those sacred places. Thank you to the waterways, the salt water from the ocean, the fresh water from the Woonasquatucket, the Machasuk, and Seekonk rivers, and the bay where they all meet. Thank you to the land that gathers along the water into our hills of Providence. Thank you to the birds that live here year-round, and the birds that stop here to find resources along their ancient migrations. Thank you to the pollinators that help us and the plants enjoy the fruits of their labor. And thank you to the creatures, big and small, who hold space in our city. Thank you to the fungal associates who break things down after their life has ended to help the cycle of life keep turning. And a special, special thanks to our plants and our trees, our urban forests that provide us cleaner air to breathe, a respite from the heat of summers, home and food to many, because long after we all go, trees will still be here. Although today we meet digitally, many of us work or live in the Providence area. The work of the PVD Tree Plan has very, very much to do with this land that we call Providence today. And even before this was ever called Providence, the meeting place of these waterways, the hills, the old eelgrass beds in the bay, made this a meeting place of people too. In doing this work, we can never forget that Providence was built on the homelands of the Narragansett, the Pokanoket, the Nipmuc, the Seekonk, the Niantic, the Wampanoag, the Pequot, the Scatichoke, the Nauset, and the Mohegan. That colonial greed took away our clean water and stripped away our indigenous rights. Never forget that Rhode Island got its money from slavery. And the slavery and the trade of enslaved peoples, the indigenous and African peoples, from here to the Caribbean to Europe. I would like to acknowledge that today, the Narragansett Nation, the only currently federally recognized tribe in the state, does not have access to their traditional waterways, and we have a lot of relational amends that have to happen between indigenous folks that are still resiliently here and the rest of Rhode Island. And finally, I'd also like to thank all of the folks who came here and who are community here, who are indigenous to lands further away. Having that sacred bond, having that close relationship to any sort of land is really important, and bringing that knowledge to the table is important. If there are any Native folks who are watching this right now, I just want to say that your voice matters, and we're still here, and that we need to have more of a say in what happens to the land and the ecology here. And a lot of this plan and what you see here tonight will speak to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Tone. My name is Jonah Dunstan, and I use they, them pronouns. And I'm a member of the steering committee, and I've been watering and taking care of trees for the past few years in Providence. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the introduction of the plan that's kind of like a story of my own. It's a little exercise in imagining what our urban forests can look like in the future. So I invite you to sit back and imagine. Let's say it's June, the first day of the year that it really feels like summer. When you open the door and step outside, the air feels hot and heavy on your face. At the curb, a small tree greets you, its limbs waving in the wind. Still only a few feet off the ground, the branches aren't big or tall enough to shade the sidewalk yet. But this tree wasn't always there. You remember when it was a patch of sidewalk that was bare concrete baking in the sun. When your neighbor organized a community tree planting on your block, you got a new tree, a cherry tree. You recognized it because it was your mother's favorite. You watched the baby cherry tree through your window, its delicate pink flowers in the spring, green summer leaves that light up blazing red and orange come fall. You've watched your younger neighbor alongside the tree, picking up weekly watering jobs for some extra summer cash. Then, then learning how to prune its quickly spreading branches. She helps your other neighbors to prune their trees now too. As you walk towards the bus stop on Narragansett Boulevard, the older and bigger trees reach overhead. Your grandparents, maybe your grandparents planted these trees. Maybe these trees' ancestors were cared for by the Narragansett people whom these streets gets its name from. When you get to the bus stop and plop down, you're grateful for the cool relief that the shade provides. Next door, an auntie lounges under her backyard apple tree, cold drink in hand, while she bounces her giggling granddaughter on her knee. When the tree's spring flowers, the tree's spring flowers just started to transform into tiny red fruits, and you wonder what treats they'll become of in the fall. At Columbia Park, kids darting around the tree-lined playground, a few huddled around the corner, building a small castle from the twigs and leaves that have fallen to the ground. The kids' shouts drift towards you, mingling with the songs of the birds hopping around the tree canopy, the hum of life, and the sound of trees rustling in the wind. Wherever you step in Providence, you're in the urban forest. In fact, this sprawling forest extends beyond the borders of the city itself, into Cranston, Pawtucket, and Central Falls. Through these cities, our trees are our neighbors. We live in relation to these incredible beings along the streets, in our backyards, and in our parks. Trees in our cemeteries, parking lots, schoolyards, and campuses. They grow along the river and along the highway. They grow where you plant them and sometimes where you don't plant them, climbing through chain link fences and empty parking lots. The term urban forest describes the collection of these trees in the city and all of the living things that rely on them, including us.
Thank you, Jonah, for helping us all imagine what our future urban forest will feel like. My name is Cassie Theringer. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of the Providence Neighborhood Planting Program. And in that capacity, I am a member of the steering committee and one of the project coordinators of the PVD Tree Plan. I am also a resident of the south side of Providence. So we envision a city where a thriving and healthy and resilient urban forest supports thriving and healthy and resilient people, and where those people, us, support the urban forest and each other in turn. And the PVD Tree Plan charts out a path to achieve this vision by following the recommendations that we've outlined that you'll be hearing more about in a moment. We believe we can work towards a future where everyone in Providence experiences the health and climate and economic and social benefits of our tree canopy, regardless of where in the city you live. We know our urban forest is a connected ecosystem, and we are all part of that ecosystem, and we are individually and collectively stronger and more resilient when every part of that system is able to flourish. But more practically, what is the PVD Tree Plan? And how did we get here and how did it come to be? So this project is a community-led, multi-year, citywide initiative to create a comprehensive and strategic plan for our urban forest. It was collaboratively created by many, many individual, community, nonprofit, and city municipal stakeholders. This plan is not owned by any one person or one entity, and that is very intentional. It's grown from a participatory process, and it seeks to represent collective community priorities. Along the way, it has been guided and shaped by a steering committee at this moment, the folks here on the Zoom, but many people over the last few years, who is made up of both climate justice frontline community representatives and urban forestry practitioners and technical consultants, some of whom you're hearing from tonight or who are out there in this webinar, I know. But it's a testament to the deeply, deeply collaborative work of this nature of this project that we can't name everyone who contributed, even close. We'd be here all night just on that. So thank you to all those people. You know who you are. We're also incredibly grateful to the people who have funded this planning process and made this possible. It takes money to do this work. All of the implementation and recommendations that we're going to hear about, that's going to take money too, and we'll get to that, and we're going to need that investment. But to do this, to get to this point and do this process of creating this plan, it takes time. And it takes time and money to fairly compensate community members for participating and leadership, which is critical to creating an equitable planning process, and time to have the space and time to problem solve and build trust, and not always do things in the most efficient A to B way, but to figure out how do we do this type of planning work in maybe a way that hasn't always been done before. And so none of that would have been possible without trust and support and resources from funders. So we thank them for that. And to that process and that time put into that, since we started this community planning process and kicked off our outreach engagement process in 2020, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of community members and stakeholders have shared their tree-related needs and concerns and dreams and visions and priorities. We spent a lot of time out pounding the pavement and the parks, talking to folks through our community survey, which received over almost 900 responses, presentations to community groups, sector-specific focus groups, one-on-one interviews, informal conversations, citywide events, flyers, posters, tabling, canvassing. We went to weekend soccer games and farmers markets and school pickup drop-off lines. So all of that has informed the content of this plan and the recommendations you're going to hear. And we want to emphasize that our ultimate accountability with this plan and this work is to the people of Providence, to all of us, and to the trees of Providence. And in particular, to the climate justice frontline communities who are impacted first and worst by climate disruption and by environmental racism and by tree inequity. So through that process and through this plan, we strove to center the voices and the needs and the priorities of those folks who live and work in low canopy neighborhoods and are most vulnerable to tree inequities impacts. But to actualize this vision, it's going to take all of us. This is going to be an all hands on deck moment. This plan is a blueprint. It's also an invitation. We invite you to join us together. The work's just getting started. So together we will make our city healthier and greener, more resilient and more just.
Hey everyone, you might remember me from earlier. Just to remind you all, my name is Tonya Gadarivan. My pronouns are they, them, and I have been a member of the steering committee for the PVD Tree Plan for the past 2+ years. But outside of being somebody who is a person of color who lives in a low canopy neighborhood in Providence, I also am a practicing green worker. I've been working in urban forestry for 5 years. I've had my Massachusetts arborist license for 2.5 years, and I do both work all over the Northeast with Davie Resource Group, but also I am a member of the Providence neighborhood planting program, and I help coordinate tree planting within the city of Providence. So not only am I a fiercely dedicated and opinionated Native person, I also have a lot of tree experience. But you might be wondering, why trees? Why is the urban forest such a big deal? And boy, howdy, do I have a lot of opinions about that, but I'll try to limit myself. Um, we have this unfounded notion that cities should be concrete jungles, when in reality, what we need is to live in close relationship to trees and to the rest of nature in order to thrive. Providence is an old colonial city built on top of indigenous villages and trade routes, and how we use our land has changed a lot over the past few hundred years. There's a lot more humans densely packed in this city. There's automotive vehicles that didn't used to be here a few hundred years ago, when they were building these like colonial roads in town. There's definitely trees that hadn't used to be, it wasn't usually the convention that there were a ton of street trees around, maybe say like 200 years ago. Maybe like really nice landscape stuff, but not this necessarily like the density of street trees that we hope to achieve. There's also underground and overhead utilities and bus lines, and we all have to exist in these very close quarters in Providence. But in 2023, we're already experiencing impacts of climate crisis, climate change, and those impacts are only getting worse. They're not only experienced, and they're also not experienced equally by everybody in Providence. When we're talking about environmental racism, we're talking about like deeply entrenched systems of white supremacy, structural racism that have shaped our cities so that these environmental factors, really hit people who are underserved in so many other ways. People of color, traditionally low income folks. These are the people who see the worst impacts of extreme heat, extreme flooding, and severe storms, and who, the bounce back from it, the after effects of going through something traumatic from the environment are so much harder to bounce back from. This means that an equitable tree canopy is an increasingly vital piece of community infrastructure. It's an important way to work towards repairing harms caused by environmental racism. And trees provide us with so many benefits. They improve our health. They remove pollution out of the air that we breathe. They reduce rates of childhood asthma, respiratory illness, heart disease. Especially, when you think about Providence, so many of our neighborhoods are just completely lined with highways and big infrastructure, and without good barriers, like all of that is just immediately getting breathed in when you go to walk your dog, when you're dropping your kid off at the bus stop, all of these things. That help keep us cool in the summer. NASA has found that Providence already experiences surface temperatures almost 22 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the less urban surroundings around Providence. That's a really big difference. If like the woods right outside of Providence, it's 80, it could be 100 in the city, and that's tough when you got to walk places. And they can also lower air temperature in city neighborhoods by 10 degrees, just having trees there. They can also help reduce flooding. I'm sure everybody remembers when 95 flooded earlier this year. Removing pollutants from stormwater and just physically removing gallons of stormwater away from our streets is really important. It disrupts infrastructure. It causes damage. There's a bunch of reasons why we don't want that. Also, trees help us save money and they reduce our utility bills. Did you know that just one mature tree has the same cooling effect as 10 room-sized air conditioners? And also, if you put like an AC unit, like a window AC, in the shade, it'll just say a tree, rather than in direct sunlight, it will perform much more efficiently. Properly placed trees can reduce air conditioning costs by 30% and reduce heating costs in the winter by 20 to 50%. A healthy urban forest can help protect families against rising utility rates, which is a really big concern. It's all on the forefront of our minds. And Trees can nourish our minds, our hearts, our communities. They're part of our stories, our memories, our art, our traditions. They can connect us to home, even if home is far away. And trees are homes in and of themselves. I would love the local squirrels to live in a street tree rather than in my roof or somewhere else in my home. So and they improve our mental health. They provide us with spaces to relax, to gather in community. And one last thing I want to share is just that when we take care of our trees around us, they take care of us. Generally, we invite you to think of trees as our neighbors, as our relatives, part of our community, because when we recognize these beings as our living neighbors, elders, caretakers, we come to understand our responsibilities to take care of them as they take care of us. So, just about living in reciprocity.
Thank you, Tone. I am AJ Elton. My pronouns are he and him. Until recently, I was the city forester for the city of Providence. I am now a community forester for the Green Infrastructure Center, still working in Providence, still working in Rhode Island. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I've had the honor and pleasure to work on this plan over the past couple of years. The state of our urban forest. As stated, trees are our neighbors. In fact, 27% of Providence is covered in tree canopy. That's more than 3,200 acres and more than 415,000 trees, individual trees in the city of Providence. One thing that's essential to managing an urban forest is knowing what you have and where you have it. How can you manage something if you don't know what it is or where it is? In order to plan for and assess the needs of an urban forest and measure how it is changing over time, you must have good records of the trees.
Hi all, I'm Doug Still. I'm also a former Providence City Forester. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm now a consulting arborist and an arbor mediator. And I'm a former member of the PVD steering committee early on. And just a little bit to add to the background, in 2007, and then again in 2017, we've done a comprehensive street tree inventory of all Providence trees, the diameters, species, locations, and other data in order to, properly manage the trees. As AJ said, we need to know what the resource is. Also in 2018, we did an urban tree canopy assessment using data also from 2011 to compare to, in addition to an urban tree canopy study we did in 2007. All of these studies together, thankfully, have shown that actually our tree canopy has been increasing, especially along the streets, nearly a 10% increase over that time in street trees. But certainly not enough, and it's certainly not addressing the equity issues that we have nearly enough. And so that's, one thing that this plan is all about and how we can do better. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, AJ. You got to give it up for the city of Providence and what a beautiful city it is to have two ex-city foresters still engaged, still with us, caring about the health of our city and sitting down with residents to find solutions to make it healthier, make it more equitable. But when you think about well, actually, let me introduce myself. My name is Leandro Cufa Castro. Very happy to be here. I am a steering committee member of the PVD Tree Plan. How I relate to this work, I worked with Groundwork Rhode Island for about 4 years, coordinating equitable tree planting and also planting on the ground. Work that I miss very much. Just being on the ground, planting trees, connecting to community members. And now I work at Building Futures, and I'm very excited to have this kind of work and be involved in this kind of work. Just before we jump into what tree equity is, I would like to define it first. Sometimes these become buzzwords or words that we use very regularly, and just to ground ourselves on what it is. Tree equity is the fair, equitable distribution or prioritized distribution of trees that are prioritized in the neighborhoods and for the people that need it the most. So that everyone, not mattering what their neighborhood they live in, their race, their wealth, that they can access the benefits of trees, the health benefits, the climate and economic benefits that Tony mentioned. As you look at this map right here in these slides, that see what stories they tell. Where do you see yourself in this map? And take in consideration your race, your income, and where do you live on that map? If you work for a nonprofit that serves mainly low income or people of color, where do they live on that map? This reminds me of 1997. So it's 1997. I'm probably 9 years old. My brother is 7. I'm asking my mom, Mommy, can we go out to play? It is way too hot for you to go out to play. Let's wait until it cools down. But I want to go out and play ball. Let's wait until the temperature goes down. It's finally about 5 o'clock. We live in the south side of Providence, Elmwood. Right behind us, we have all the jewelry factories. It's extremely hot at that area. And my mom takes us into her hatchback, probably like a 1989 Toyota Camry, and which is extremely hot when we get in. And we drive over to a Cranston, well-shaded, cool park. And at the time, I don't notice that this area is much greener than the neighborhood I live in. But now looking back, looking at the fact that we couldn't really play in our neighborhood, we had to go to a greener side of the city to go play. What did that do? That disconnected me and our family to our neighborhood. We had to go access a healthier environment across the city, across to another city to be able to enjoy that. So looking at these maps, especially if you live in these blisters of heat, of extreme flooding, it is extremely hard work, and that's why we want people to use this plan, so that if you have anything to do with tree planting or can use your voice to make sure that green resources are prioritized and are being put in the areas that need it most, please, that is what we aim to do. And that is a resource that we're putting in your hands as practitioners, as residents, to advocate for green resources, trees to be brought and maintained, because trees cannot just be planted on the ground and left there in the neighborhoods that need it most.
Thanks, Kufa. Hi, everyone. I am Candace Pounding. I use she, her pronouns. I am on the PVD Tree Plan Steering Committee and am also the program director for Providence Neighborhood Planting Program.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Sada Hashim, and I use she, they pronouns. I'm also a member of the steering committee. I live and work on the south side of Providence as a community organizer, a youth educator, and a land steward with Groundwork Rhode Island. Candace and I actually met in the summer of 2019 to start the work of implementing stewardship programs and to help young people foster a relationship with our urban forests. We've developed a clear vision for our urban forest. In the plan, we make recommendations in 6 different action areas in order to address these questions. What steps do we need to take and who should take them? These action areas are community leadership and engagement, planting, maintenance and management, workforce development, funding and financing, and finally, policy and planning. In each of these 6 areas, we engaged in group reflection and deep collaboration to develop goals and strategies around the needs and opportunities of our urban forest. To be clear, goals are the broad outcomes we hope to achieve, which will support us in our mission to reach tree equity. They're the destination. And strategies are the approaches that we recommend to achieve those goals. They're the paths forward, guiding our progress towards the destination. For each strategy, we identified some of the key partners who will need to play a role.
The range of recommendations that we make in the plan is actually really wide, and that's because the urban forest itself intersects with so many aspects of our community, as previous speakers have already outlined. But for example, we include things in the plan like shifting our land use and development ordinances so that they can better support the urban forest. And on top of that, boosting the city's capacity to actually enforce those ordinances, because ordinances mean nothing if they're not actually, being carried out. Addressing conflicts between tree roots and sidewalks by implementing responsive and preventative techniques so that our most vulnerable community members don't trip over themselves and injure themselves when they're just trying to take a nice walk. And increasing investment in proactive tree maintenance and pruning, and collaborating with for-profit urban forestry actors like utility companies and private arborists who we know are doing a heck of a lot of the tree work in our city. We're not going to go through all the strategies tonight. That would take way too long. It's a really long plan, but we hope that you'll take the time to look at the plan itself and read through the strategies. And we encourage you also to think of yourself as part of the plan. Think about where you see yourself fitting in. What parts of these, strategies and goals do you see yourself in? But tonight we wanted to take a moment to zoom in on a few parts of the plan that feel especially important to us and share our vision for them. So first of all, throughout this plan, throughout this whole multi-year process, we've been thinking a lot continuously about community agency and governance and how that intersects with planning and enacting urban forestry work. Because of that, it's really important to us that we establish an urban forest community advisory board for Providence that operates outside of the city government. Our city's climate justice frontline communities have really meaningful relationships with trees, lived experiences of the impacts of tree inequity, and knowledge about what their neighborhoods need. People who live in neighborhoods know the most and the best about what the needs are in that specific neighborhood. But these same communities tend to be excluded from planning and decision-making processes that directly affect them. So because of this, we envision a fundamental shift in who holds power over the future of our urban forest. This board that I'm describing will play a key role in this shift, directing the implementation of the tree plan, guiding urban forestry management, and ensuring ongoing accountability as community needs change, as they undoubtedly will. The board should also be supported by and work closely with city departments and community organizations like the ones represented on the steering committee in order to guide decisions and activities related to tree planting, tree maintenance, funding, and policy making. Just like the steering committee for this plan, this board will include both urban forestry practitioners and non-practitioners while maintaining majority participation from BIPOC community members, youth, and residents of tree equity focus areas.
We also want to invest in community stewardship models to care for our trees. Candace and I know firsthand that sustaining a healthy and resilient urban forest takes a lot of work. And this can be a burden, especially for communities that have been marginalized with their resources limited. But when frontline communities are trained and resourced, the burdens of tree care can become shared opportunities for trees and people to thrive together. As we have already begun to do with both youth and adult groups, we'll continue to train and pay community members to water and prune young trees in their own neighborhoods, including trees on streets, parks, residential and commercial properties, as well as institutional properties, community gardens, and orchards. We'll do this through workforce development, youth education, and short-term employment programs. These opportunities for flexible, low-commitment, hyper-local work can meet the needs of people who face barriers to employment, and they can serve as sort of trial jobs in arboriculture and provide an on-ramp to further training in the field.
One other recommendation that we wanted to highlight from the plan is to establish a permanent residential tree planting program in Providence. Currently, only one temporary program exists that specifically supports Providence residents with planting and caring for their backyards. As many of you know, most of the current free planting opportunities in Providence are for street trees, which is really important, but we know that the majority of the potential planting area in the city is on private properties, in backyards, and we really need to make sure we have programs in place for that. And without having a program such as this, turns yard trees into a luxury that's only available to people with the time and money to invest in them, because we know that having a tree in your yard can be, an expense. It's a really important thing to have, but there can be costs associated with it. And we want to make sure that aspect of our urban forest is also functioning equitably. So because of this, we want to develop more free yard tree planting opportunities, especially in tree equity focus areas. And these programs would include technical assistance with species and site selection, delivery, and planting support, in addition to funding options to help cover long-term tree care costs for community members who need that assistance because of the high cost of mature tree care.
Thank you so much, Candace and Sada. My name is Jordan Schmolka, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a steering committee member and a staff member at Providence Neighborhood Planting Program, as well as Movement Education Outdoors. So Candace and Sada did a really beautiful job sort of giving some high-level overviews of the recommendations and drawing out some key points, and I want to keep that going. As we developed the goals and strategies in the plan over the course of really several years, 3 really core overarching needs emerged as themes. So the first of these is coordination. We need better structures to collaborate and communicate across all the many people whose work affects our urban forests, so that we can work in closer alignment towards a shared urban forest vision. We need to be on the same page, and this includes the big picture, like being invested in shared goals and values. And this also includes the really nitty-gritty stuff, like having consistent technical standards and centralized systems for tracking data. So the second overarching need that we identified is capacity building. We need stronger investment in the people and organizations who care for our trees. A lot of our urban forests' most pressing needs, including maintenance of both young and old trees, enforcement of tree protection policies, and ongoing community advocacy. These needs can't be met without increased funding and staff capacity for the City Forestry Division and urban forestry community organizations and individual community members. So that sort of leads me to the third core need or theme, which is community ownership or leadership. We need clear pathways for frontline communities to directly participate in both stewardship activities and management decisions at all levels. So from determining locations for tree plantings on their block, to guiding the allocation of citywide urban forestry funds, residents, and especially climate justice frontline communities should have the power to shape the urban forests that we live in. It's up to us collectively, really, to build the structures we need to facilitate that type of nation. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the tree canopy target that we developed as part of this planning process. As Kufa and others have discussed tonight, the ultimate goal of this work is to achieve true tree equity in Providence so that all residents of the city have equal access to the health, climate, and economic benefits of our urban forest. But we've got a lot of work to do to get there, and to guide our work along the way, we've identified a set of tree equity focus areas across the city, and we've developed an initial canopy target for these areas. So we zeroed in on locations throughout the city that currently have low tree canopy, and especially focused on places where health and climate impacts are most severely felt and where our most vulnerable communities live. So we drew on tree canopy and other environmental, climate, demographic, and health data at the census block group level, drawing on some of those urban forestry assessments and all of the really rich data sets that Doug mentioned earlier and many others. And we combined all that data with community members on the ground knowledge. Because as Candace has pointed out and others today, people know what their communities need and what their neighborhoods need. People know what it feels like to live in your own neighborhood. So we combined all this stuff to develop this map of tree equity focus areas that you see here. They're the areas in the map that are shaded in that sort of dark green or teal. And these areas are collectively home to more than 105,000 people, 80% people of color, 50% experiencing poverty, and 37% children and elders. So in these tree equity focus areas, we want to increase tree canopy by 50% over the next 25 years while maintaining existing canopy levels across the city. So this will involve planting and maintaining around 30,377 trees, or on average 3,038 per year for the next 10 years. So really meeting this target, increasing tree canopy in these tree equity focus areas by 50% will produce really large scale environmental and economic benefits that tangibly improve the lives of Providence residents. Every single year, these trees would support about 221 jobs, sequester over 690,000 tons of carbon, which is equivalent to the output of over 134,000 gas-powered cars or almost 79,000 homes. These trees would intercept 34.6 million gallons of rainfall every year and remove 38,000, more than that, pounds of pollution from the air we breathe. And every year they'd provide a combined environmental benefit worth about $437,000, although we say this with some grains of salt because it's really impossible to accurately monetize all of the many gifts that and benefits that trees offer us. So achieving this vision will require some sustained long-term commitment, including significant increases in the scale of our financial investments and existing programs supporting urban forestry. But one thing we have to say is our survey tells us that 98.3% of respondents think we should increase investment into Providence's trees. And trees are some of the only infrastructure that actually increase in value over time.
Thank you, Jordan. My name is Sophia Diaz. I work with the Nature Conservancy in Rhode Island, and I'm connected to the PVD Tree Plan through Sheila Dormady, who is now with the City of Providence. So I help with some fiscal responsibility and administration for the steering committee, as well as support the steering committee and the coordination group with some administrative support. While lots of work went into creating this plan, the real collaborative work of realizing its vision and of its planning, investing in this plan, growing, managing, maintaining our urban forest is just the beginning. So we invite you to join us. We hope that the plan's recommendations will be incorporated into the city's upcoming comprehensive plan and adopted by city officials. And we're excited to share that we recently received a collaborative problem-solving grant from the Environmental Protection Agency to establish our Urban Forest Community Advisory Board, which Candace mentioned earlier, and begin this important work of building structures for community leadership and governance. But as we shift toward the implementation phase of this plan, we need to continue to find creative ways to fund all the activities within it and attract big investments in the future of our urban forest. Just as our urban forest has an interconnected network, it takes an interconnected network to sustain and expand it. And we know that all of you have a role to play.
Woo! We know that was a lot of information, y'all. Thank you so much, Sophia, and the entirety of the PVD Tree Plan. I also like to extend a thank you to all of you who provided their time and energy in any part of the plan. And a special thank you to those who wrote the Climate Justice Plan as we used it as a model. Thank you, everyone who came out tonight. Really appreciate your presence. We also want to share that we want you to read the PVD Tree Plan. I know we said multiple times that it's a long one and there's a lot of information in there, but please read it, share it widely. Follow us on Instagram at PVD Tree Plan to learn about unfolding opportunities involved. Come to future events. And if you have any questions or want to talk, please reach out to us. hello@pvdtreeplan.org. We're going to share a link directly to you for everybody who's made it here tonight. We're going to share the plan with you in the chat for a link directly to the plan, and that could be part of your bedtime reading tonight. Thank you again, y'all. Appreciate you, and take good care. Have a good night.